All right. I have Greg Nuckols on the call with me. I'm very excited to have him on. He's been the talk of the town recently. You just can't not see his face. It's actually quite enjoyable. And so we're going to be talking about a few different topics. But Greg has really got a solid understanding. Well, he's got a solid name to begin with, but he also has a solid understanding of the strength, the science and application of really building strength. I mean, he is he's heavily integrated himself in the research, and he's also achieved world records in powerlifting. So he has a pretty cool background. He also helps coach and work with clients. So today we're going to really be talking about. We'll get in touch with a little bit of his background, but then we'll be learning about some pretty cool strength tactics. So first of all, Greg, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Greg?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I'm here in Toronto, and it's just starting to get like colder and colder and colder each day, and so that's a little depressing. I like to go outside and go and get in the fresh air, but eventually it's like, no, this isn't happening. I'm just gonna be locked up in my room.
It's cold here by Orange County standards. I can go outside and there's people like walking around in coats and sweatpants and boots and stuff, and I'm like, what are you doing? It's 65 degrees outside.
65 degrees, no kidding. And that's what I dislike about like the California area is that like if it's 65 degrees and there's one cloud in the sky, everyone's like, oh, the weather's so bad today. God, it's gonna be a horrible day.
It's actually hilarious too because like California weather is absolutely fantastic. Like it's between 70 and 85 all the time. There were 4 straight days this summer where it was over 90 degrees, and for 2 of those days that was front page news. People were like, "Oh, heat wave! Like it's 93 degrees." It was so funny. I'm like, you people have it so good. You have no idea.
Yeah.
Paradise.
They don't get it. They should just come to like Toronto or something for like 3 days and like, wow. Then they cannot complain. Yeah, because when I went to LA last winter, I was the first thing I noticed. Just everyone is just like I was there. I'm like, this weather's amazing. They're like, it's horrible. I'm like, oh my god. but let's get down to some brass tacks. How did you first become drawn into the culture of strength training?
Honestly, it was kind of by accident. I was a really competitive basketball player when I was a kid, which it turned out well that I got into powerlifting because I'm 5'9" and white, so probably didn't have too much more potential for basketball. But yeah, I played basketball and I also played football, and I was always very concussion prone. And somewhere between my freshman and sophomore years of high school, I was at football camp, and I got my last like really major concussion. Like it was a grade 3, little bit of brain hemorrhaging. The doctors basically told me the same thing they told Steve Young. Like if you get another concussion, like you could potentially die, probably have long-term brain damage. So you should not do these things anymore. I was like, well, that sucks because, I mean, even though it's not like football, basketball still has a contact element. So that basically knocked me out of competitive sports. And I had recently started lifting weights, some like to help with football and basketball, and I had a natural aptitude for it. And so I just took that up full time to keep my competitive juices going, and the rest was history.
Wow. And I remember reading somewhere that you actually were able to dunk a basketball.
Yeah, I could. My freshman year of high school, I was about 160, and I have these little baby hands, so I actually had to dunk it with 2 hands. I could do a 56-inch box jump, and I had a 35-inch vertical.
Yeah, that is insane. Dunking in grade 9 at like 5'9"
Yeah.
and white, God, you just defy like every stereotype.
Oh, you know who Shane Hammond is, right?
Yeah, he's an extraordinarily strong Olympic lifter.
Yeah, he's like, I haven't met him in person, but I've heard he's like 5'8" or 5'9". He was like 350, 360 when he was in his competitive prime. But at that height, at 350, he could dunk a basketball and do a standing backflip.
Damn.
So
Yeah.
there are better jumping white people out there.
Yeah. Well, it's actually been one of my goals to be able to dunk a basketball at one point, and I can, grab I'm 5'10", I can like grab the rim, I can do like a 50-inch, maybe even a 51-inch box jump standing, but I'm still, probably good 3-4 inches away from being able to get enough clearance. So, what did you find effective for building your vert? And I guess Shane Hammond is an interesting example because those Olympic lifts must really carry over to vertical jump. And how do you find that compares to like building up squat and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the things that helped me the most for building my vertical were, one, learning how to squat, because I started lifting like seriously my freshman year of high school, and going into that year I could like barely tip the rim with the tips of my fingers, and by the end of that year I could dunk. So and that roughly coincided with when I started squatting, so I think that helped a lot. And I also did a lot of weighted plyometrics. In hindsight, now that I know more about training, because I was just, someone showed me these things, I was like, hey, that looks cool, I'll try that. And, of course, if some is good, more is better. So I saw people doing box jumps holding like 15-pound dumbbells. And so something I tried to do is the heaviest 36-inch box jump possible. And I got to where I could do a 36-inch box jump holding 60-pound dumbbells.
Two pair of 60-pounders. Wow.
Yeah, and I'm sure that somewhere probably around like 30 or so I hit a point of diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. But I'm someone who, if I don't have like clearly defined and measurable goals, I just get really lazy. And that was just one of those goals that, even if like physiologically it might have not been quote unquote optimal, it was something I found a lot of fun, and it kept me consistent with my jump training, and I think the consistency was the most important thing.
Right, and when you're saying like it may not be the most optimal way to train, is that just based on like the new research around plyometrics, or
Yeah. So honestly, I haven't read too terribly much of the research about jumping, but as far as sprinting goes, the consensus there seems to be that anything that, one, substantially alters your technique, or two, changes the force velocity curve and takes more than like 5, 10, maybe 15% off of your max velocity, that it's just a matter of training specificity. That if you're training for speed and you're training for speed too slowly, it doesn't have as much transference as you would like it to. And I mean, if I could produce enough velocity to do like a 50+ inch box jump without any weight, then only being able to do a 36-inch box jump, that's what, like a 40% difference. So it wasn't as specific to the goal as it could have been, but I'm sure it still had some transference.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I think like that like back in the day there were a lot of myths around like, oh, baseball players should do weighted like swings, and boxers should like hold like heavy like dumbbells and punch, and then like kind of right, the consensus was no, just build strength with like compound proper movements, and then that strength will carry over much more effectively into your skill than trying to add weight to your skill, which compromises the technique and the movement. Right, that makes a lot of sense. Do you still have like that powerful vert now, or is that something that's kind of
I can still get like my first knuckle or two over the rim at like 250. So I've lost probably, well, no, I know how much I've lost. I've lost 5 inches on my vert. I can, depending on the day, I can still jump 29 or 30-inch vertical, but not 35, 36 anymore.
Right. Well, I guess that's just a matter of just being like really big now.
Yeah.
And having a lot more weight.
And also not training for it.
Right.
I mean, I don't really jump anymore, or or do really much of anything athletic except for pick things up.
Yeah, no, I was just fascinated by the fact that you could dunk and hit like a 56-inch vertical. That's just something that I've always found.
No, not 56
Sorry,
inch
sorry,
vertical.
56-inch box jump. I meant 56-inch box jump. 56-inch vertical would just be like defying every like ounce of gravity.
That would be silly.
That would just be like floating in the air. But so now let's really talk about because you've experienced a lot of different strength protocols that you've used in order to build up your lifts, and I know you've hit some world records in powerlifting in your total for bench press, squat, and deadlift. What have you found has been like the most what have you found has been like the most effective setup in order to make consistent strength gains? And let's kind of frame it from someone that isn't at elite level, because I imagine it changes and you have to plan for a little bit slower strength gains. But let's imagine someone is at the intermediate point. What sort of setup you find is the most effective in terms of workouts per week and like the set rep progression model?
Okay, so I think a mistake that a lot of people at that level make is most of them are coming off like a beginner strength training program where they're adding weight to the bar every workout or every week or something like that, and they're trying to like figure out how to keep that gravy train flowing, but you get to a point where that's just simply not possible anymore, because I mean you're dealing with biology. Like I think the best analogy I've heard is rather than trying to treat your body like a factory or like a machine where if you put these inputs into it, you expect like predictable outputs all the time from the exact same things. You treat it more like a garden where, like, if you put seeds in the ground and water them, like, you can't force them to grow. You just try to give them the best conditions where they can grow. And so I think once you reach the point where you can't just like rigidly add the same amount of weight to the bar over a given period of time, you have to start kind of shifting your mindset, not into how can I keep these linear gains going, and more to how can I put my body, like how can I give my body the best set of circumstances for it to grow when it decides it wants to grow. And so something a lot of people don't focus sufficiently on is developing work capacity, which roughly defined, it's the amount of work that you can do and recover adequately from. Because if there's one thing that really shines through in the literature, it's that volume is the #1 driver of strength and hypertrophy gains. And so what ends up happening is a lot of beginner and like early intermediate programs are pretty low volume programs, and so once you peter out your gains on those, you have relatively low work capacity. Like your body's just simply not used to doing a lot of work, and it can't handle a ton of work. But then if you look at what most of the best athletes are doing, like you can find rare examples of some dude who's brutally strong and not doing a ton of training volume. But for every one of those, there's like 30 guys who are doing an amount of work that just like makes you want to cringe and curl up in a ball in the fetal position. So what you need to start doing is working towards being able to handle that amount of volume. And a trap that people fall into is, so you have like a certain amount of work capacity, which is like the amount of work you can do and recover from adequately. And you find that with your current training program, you're not getting any stronger anymore. And so this is where people often fall into the trap of minimalism, like really heavy but really low volume training programs. And they do them for a couple weeks and find like, hey, I'm getting stronger again. But if you actually think about what's going on there, it's because, again, they're reducing their volume, and they're capable of recovering from more work than they're doing with their new super low volume program. So it's not necessarily that they're actually getting stronger. They're basically peaking. Like you would peak for a competition, how you taper your volume, raise your intensity the last few weeks going into a meet. So they find that they can get stronger for another like 4, 5, 6 weeks by cutting their volume back even further. But really what they're doing is peaking, and they're compromising their work capacity even more. So that's all a very long way of saying once you kind of become a more intermediate lifter, at least for a bit, obviously strength is still important, but what you need to start working towards is getting your body capable of handling a higher workload, because then once you build that work capacity and your body's capable of handling a larger workload, then it can start benefiting from a larger workload, and you can really, that volume that's the #1 driver of strength and hypertrophy, you can really start putting that to work for you. And really the thing that's going to limit you long term is just simply how much work you can do and benefit from. Like you can't increase your volume like 500% overnight and expect to get a lot stronger, but if you don't increase your volume substantially over the next couple of decades, you're just simply not going to be able to work your way past plateaus unless you can do more beneficial work.
Okay. Interesting. It's funny because I've always utilized a lower volume minimalist style routine. I've made extraordinary gains in strength, but I guess it also comes down to the fact that I also kind of maintain a strict diet, and so a lot of times my nutrition.
Oh yeah, so that's also another really important point. This is all like completely relative to what your goals are, and that last answer was basically coming with the assumption that your primary goal is long term to get as strong as you possibly can, and so then you start getting into a discussion of diminishing returns and marginal utility, and like what you were talking about, that you can make really good gains on like a low volume minimalist program for a long time. I would not dispute that. Like the 80-20 rule plays into this very strongly. The idea that you get 80% of your results from 20% of your inputs. So you can make very, very good progress with a very minimalistic training program. And so if someone's just like, hey, I want to look good, I want to get stronger, like you don't have to do that much to accomplish that. But like let's say you have like a 500-pound deadlift and you want like a 700-pound deadlift, and you keep plateauing at the same strength level, eventually you just have to do more, or you have to ask yourself, like, what's my primary goal here? Is it to get the best results with the least amount of effort possible, or is it simply to get the best results possible, efficiency be damned? Because being the best you can possibly be and being like hyper efficient and getting a lot out of a little, those are really two conflicting goals.
Right, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so how does the concept of a higher volume or higher work capacity directly influence strength gains?
Well, when you, let's see, who was the researcher?
Is that like just you know, training that skill more and more frequently with more often and just improving like neuromuscular coordination, or
It's both that, and then also I mean the main drivers of hypertrophy are muscular tension and like metabolite accumulation and just total workload. So if you can do more volume with a weight that causes more muscular tension and also handle more of the accessories that cause like more metabolic stress to the muscle, like all of those things just basically stress the muscles more. And also, like what you were saying, the more quality reps you get in more often, the more you reinforce those neural connections. So it's both for neural reasons and just for structural reasons. Oh, that's another thing. Like if you're trying to get into strength sports, a lot of people, especially early on, worry about their weight way too much. Like if you've been working out for like 2 years or something and you're like 170 pounds and you're constantly trying to cut to make the 165 class, that may be great if you're trying to like be competitive next week. But if you're really trying to focus on like where will I be the strongest and where will I be the most competitive long term, it's the biggest you can be while still being relatively lean. So if you're like 170 now, but you could be like 190, the longer that you try to hang around at that 165 class instead of just putting mass on your frame, the longer it's going to take you to actually reach your full strength potential.
Right. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Because I actually last summer ended up getting. I mean, that's a good point. But it's right. If you're keeping yourself within like earshot of 165, well, you never really give your body a chance to pack on muscle.
Yeah.
And so you're leaving all these gains on the table. And then whereas if you kind of put your ego to rest, not scored as well, giving yourself a couple years to kind of get close to your maximum muscular potential, and then kind of gravitate to a new weight class. Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because like last year I was hanging around like 190, 195, and so I was able. So then now I've cut down to low 170s, and I'm lifting the same weights, but like my relative strength is just through the roof. And so it seems like for me it's like the low 170s, at least for now, or where I'm peaking, or where my strength is because I think I've hit like upper body wise elite lifts like close to like 1.5 times body weight incline bench for 5, and so it's like a point where it's just tending to kind of max out. But then actually that brings me to another point. It's like if I wanted to try a new approach to kind of milk out more gains, I could slowly implement more, like build up my work capacity without trying to lose weight, obviously, while having enough nutrition to support that and try and just create new stressors.
Right.
And so how do you go about increasing one's work capacity if you're trying to get stronger on like the power lifts? Because I know most beginners, they'll start with like a 3x5 program, something like starting strength, or they'll go to Bill Starr 5x5. And then there's like the very popular Jim Wendler 5-3-1. How do all those kind of correlate, or how would you go from kind of those types of setups to implementing higher volume building work capacity?
Okay, so in my opinion, and in the opinions of most of the really, really strong people I've talked to, those are all very, very low volume programs. And like you can absolutely get bigger and stronger doing them, but again, like they're probably not what is going to eventually get you to be your overall biggest and strongest. And like I was saying, once you kind of get past that range where you can add strength like every day or every week, you have to get to a point that you're okay with not actually being able to put more weight on the bar for a while. And this is kind of where the concept of block periodization gets in, that you take training blocks and they each have like different purposes. And so you might train for like 8 to 12 weeks with the purpose of training your body to be able to handle more stress and to build that work capacity. And then at the end of 12 weeks, you have an absurdly high training volume. But in spite of doing so much more work, like you aren't actually any stronger. But what that's doing is that's setting the stage for being able to get a lot stronger really quickly. So then after that, like let's say you're training for 8 weeks, moving into a meet. Like over those 8 weeks, like you increase intensity and gradually taper the volume. So let's say the amount of volume your body is capable of handling and recovering from, not necessarily in getting stronger, but recovering from and returning to baseline to. Just use like an algebraic expression, like let's say that's 3x, like a 3x level of volume, and you're at a 1x level of intensity. So over those 8 to 12 weeks moving into a meet, the level of volume might taper down to x and the level of intensity moves up to 3x. But since your body is used to recovering from a 3x level of volume, like as it gets lower and lower and lower, like let's say you do a 2x amount of stress workout, but your body is still capable of recovering from a 3x amount of stress, then you get that super compensation, and your body like overshoots how much it recovers. and that's where those strength gains come from. Again, when you reach the point that you can't just linearly add weight to the bar anymore, you have to take time to build up your body's capability of handling more work, and then over 2 or 3 months reap all of the strength gains that come from that. So over like a 6-month period of time, you might spend the first 3 or 4 months not getting any stronger at all, but improving your work capacity substantially. And then over the last 2 or 3 months, you get a lot stronger all at once as you reap the benefits that you've set yourself up for with your prior training.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that sort of concept because I've been like my training is very honed and focused on building strength on key movements, and so I found that when I do increase the training volume, I'm like, well, now I'm plateauing, now I'm weaker.
Yeah.
And so I haven't seen someone really explain it as really setting the stage for subsequent strength gains, almost kind of taking a proverbial step back for a couple months. And then also there are other advantages, like if you're kind of just building up work capacity, well, there's going to be some good hypertrophy in there, more sheer volume. So, well, what would like a work capacity oriented routine look like if you're coming off like someone that's doing like a few really heavy sets in the low rep ranges? Would you do like multiple low rep sets? Would you keep the rest periods long, or do you start to shorten the rest periods? I mean, what kind of variables do you play with for you to get the best results?
Okay, so for someone who's not like really comfortable doing their own program, the Chico routines that are out there on the internet, they're actually really good examples of this. And like if you look at the ones that have numbers on them, they're the ones that were kind of aimed at like intermediate level lifters, not the super advanced guys. So if you look at like let's say numbers 29, 30, and 31, and you can Google these; they're easy to find on the internet. 29 is probably way more volume than most people are used to doing, but in terms of how Eastern Bloc lifters program and the amount of work they do, that 29 is a pretty low volume program. And then moving into 30, it's much higher volume, but the intensity is a little bit lower. So like as you increase your volume even more, the weights are a little bit lower just so your body can handle them. And then 31 is still a lot higher volume than 29 is, but the intensity starts raising again. And then 32 is a peaking program. Like the intensity goes way up, the volume goes way down, and at the end of it, you should have some pretty solid PRs. But a mistake a lot of people have with that kind of training, and when I was running Chico, like I would get a lot of questions about this, and they were almost all exactly the same. Like, oh, I did number 29, or oh, I did number 37, and I maxed after it, and I wasn't any stronger. Well, what they don't realize is you're not supposed to actually be any stronger after doing just 1 month of it, because you were spending that month like acclimating your volume or acclimating your body to a much higher workload. And then after you do that for a few months, number 32, which is a peaking program, that's where you really actualize all of those strength gains. Just kind of to use my own experience with it, I didn't peak the way that Chico says you're supposed to, but I ran 29 through 31 consecutively. And going into it, I was squatting like 515, benching 350, 360-ish, and deadlifting like 575. So I did those 3 months. I did 29, 30, and 31 consecutively. At the end of it, my work capacity was way higher than when I started it. And so at the end of it, I maxed, and I put like 30 pounds on my squat, 30 on my deadlift, and like 20 on my bench. So, I mean, not lousy.
How long is that?
Each one is 4 weeks.
Okay.
So that was 12 weeks of training, and like I got a little stronger, but not much stronger. But then over the next 12 weeks, since I had that really high work capacity built up already, I did a Bulgarian training program, which is built around like daily maxes, and it's really high intensity, really low volume. And over those next 12 weeks, I put 100 pounds on my squat and 40 on my bench and 45 or so on my deadlift. But the thing is, like, after that, I continued trying to do a Bulgarian program and just didn't get any stronger at all, because it wasn't the program in and of itself that made me stronger. It was the program within the context of my prior training, because I'd been doing this really high volume training and I had really high work capacity rolling into it. So then when I did something that was really low volume, really high intensity, my body was built up to the point that it could recover really easy from those workouts, and like, I got a lot stronger really quickly because I was realizing those strength gains that I had kind of set the stage for doing Chico.
Yeah, no, I can imagine if you're hitting an extraordinary amount of volume and then all of a sudden you're going into a workout and doing a few heavy sets, it's like your body just kind of super compensates and recovers so fast.
Yeah, and that's a mistake a lot of people make when they try a program and, like, they say it didn't work for them or something, and it's like, and that's something. That's a kind of a problem I have with a lot of, like, these programs floating around on the internet, sort of the paradigm people have, that, like, I'm going to do a 1-month program and get stronger in this 1 month. Like, you're trying to train, like, you're trying to train, like, everything all at once. But I feel like the problem with that is, like, then people are doing, they do these general programs, and that's kind of their paradigm for programming. Like, I want to get a little bit better at everything consistently all the time. And then they try a more, like, specialized program like Chico or like a Bulgarian training program, and they're like, well, it didn't work for me. And it's like, well, if you did a Bulgarian training program but your work capacity was shit going into it, like, you shouldn't expect to get that much stronger, because, well, you have low work capacity, you're doing a low volume program, you don't really have anything to like, peak and taper and super compensate from. So, like, if you're going to do a Bulgarian training program, you have to adjust it so it has a lot more volume early on and then kind of taper as you go. And conversely with Chico, like, people do 1 month of Chico programming and they're like, oh, like, I'm not any stronger. It's like, well, you're not supposed to be stronger. You're supposed to be able to handle a much higher workload. And the fact that you didn't die and get rhabdo means you can handle a much higher workload than you were once able to. So then, like, they do something else that's lower volume, and it's like, oh, I did Chico and I didn't get any stronger, but then I did 5-3-1 and I got so much stronger. It's like, 5-3-1 wasn't necessarily what made you stronger. It was Chico set the stage for whatever you did after it to be really, really effective.
Mm-hmm. And so with something like Chico, are you taking sets to close to failure, or are you keeping, like, is each set, like, staying shy in order to get most total volume? How does that work?
Yeah, there are some workouts that are a real gut check, but most of them, the volume's high, but you're always staying at least 2 or 3 reps shy of failure. So there's a lot of work, like, in the 80-ish% range, which is roughly corresponds with, like, an 8-rep max or so. But you rarely do a set that's more than, like, 2 or 3 reps. Mm-hmm. But you might do, like, 8 of them. Right. So it ends up being a pretty fair amount of work.
Okay, and do you find that that style of training, in terms of hitting, like, a 8-rep max and then doing multiple sets of, 3 or 4 reps, do you find that helps with hypertrophy? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, if someone's goal is to, like, build muscle, if they really want to build muscle and get stronger, like, is that setup effective for hypertrophy, even though they're staying a few reps shy of failure?
Yeah, I think it's effective because you end up being able to handle more total volume that way, because it helps mitigate fatigue factors. Fatigue is actually a really wild thing that a lot of people don't know nearly enough about. We like to think of fatigue solely in terms of like, physiological processes, like, oh, like, I couldn't do another rep because my muscles weren't strong enough to do another rep. But if you look at the research, you kind of get a different picture that fatigue is, it's partially a physiological state, but it's much more so a mental and like perceptual state. And a lot more of the research here is done on aerobic stuff like running and whatnot than on lifting. But the stuff there is crazy. So if you put someone on a treadmill and they're running like at 80% of their full speed, and you just tell them run until you're exhausted and you can't run anymore and you're just thrashed, like you can't take another step. So they run and run and run, and then they're like, oh, I'm exhausted, like I can't possibly keep running. But then like the next day or a few days later, well, whatever, they do this with like different exercise groups. But like then you have another exercise group where they're not just running in an empty room all alone, they're running with like a team of researchers around them, like yelling at them and like loud music playing. And they run until they're exhausted and they think they're absolutely spent. They run longer than the first group. And then with exercise to failure, like they've done this with like leg extension machines and whatnot. Same thing. Like if you just do it to voluntary failure with no like outside motivation, like no music, no people yelling at you, like you do a certain number of reps, then you'll do like 20-30% more if you have like people motivating you and whatnot. But then even after that, when you think you're absolutely spent, if you hook electrodes up to the muscle and like it's not your choice anymore, like they stimulate the muscle and make it contract, you can still do like 50% more reps. Like even when you think you're done, your body is not done. So that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Is that a painful experience having electrodes fire your muscle?
I mean, probably. I've never done it.
Okay.
But it's one of those things like fatigue, definitely there is a physical component to fatigue, but a lot of it, more of it is altered perception than actual fatigue itself, than actual like physical fatigue.
Yeah, no, it reminds me when I was in high school, in fitness class, we had to do this beep test where we run 20 meters, and we have to get there before it beeps, then we got to go back before it beeps, and it keeps going and going and going. And so a lot of the kids, a good subset of the kids in the class, would be like, oh, I'm tired, I'm finished, I got to level 5. And it's like surely you can do better than that, like, because when I was done, I was like freaking, like my face was like flush red, like I felt like I was about to pass out, like I was like borderline being nauseous, like it's almost like the last 2 minutes were so painful, but when when I was like completely done, it was even more painful.
Yeah.
And no, it's a good point. That's actually I've always found that if you're like training someone to work out, like bar none, someone that had a competitive athletic background is more likely to succeed because they actually know how to push themselves than someone that's never been involved in athletics.
Yeah. Something, obviously this isn't like published research or like a valid experimental design or whatnot, but something I've noticed is that, at least in training other people, is the expectations you give them largely affect the amount of progress they make. So I trained my wife and her little sister, and they asked me like, hey, what are good numbers for women to shoot for with their lifting? And rather than just saying like, oh, like most women don't squat like 200 or something, like, yeah, if you shoot for that, you'll be really strong. I pulled up Powerlifting Watch and showed them what the world records were for their weight class. And I was like, those are heavy lifts. And they're like, oh, okay, that's cool. So, like, the idea they get in their mind is like, oh, I'm a 160-pound woman, a 550 deadlift is a heavy deadlift. So, like, my wife and her sister both, they're very busy people. Like, her sister is a competitive volleyball player, so she was practicing 3 or 4 times a week. She only lifted twice a week with, like, a very, very basic bare bones program to make sure that she had enough energy for volleyball. And my wife was in school. She was the editor of the school newspaper, so she was a full-time student and also working 40 hours a week. So she would usually only have like one hard workout a week and like two fairly easy workouts. But both of them within like 6 or 9 months of training, my wife deadlifted 325 at a body weight of like 160, and her sister at 17 years old, no, she had just turned 18. At 18 years old, she deadlifted 385.
That's
And,
insane.
but they like it really wasn't until that point that they realized like how strong they actually were, because like there were other people or this they actually both pulled 325 at the same time at a seminar that was going on at the gym that we were training, and so like I was their training partner. Like I was really the only person they'd seen lift much. So like they see me squatting 5, pulling 6 week in and week out. That's just numbers they get used to seeing on the bar. And they hadn't really lifted with any other women, except for the guy who owned the gym, Travis Mash. His wife would be in there lifting sometimes, and she's a 132 or a 148. And she deadlifts like 360 and squats like 330 or 340. So that was the only other woman they had like context to know like what women lift. Anyway, so there was a seminar going on at the gym, and there were women from like area CrossFits there, and everyone was like maxing out and whatnot. And it was funny. Like they came over to me and they're like that woman, like she's deadlifting 225 and like she seems excited about it. Like what's going on with that? Because like they had no idea that other women actually thought that was a lot of weight. And like that's not to disparage women who deadlift 225. Like that's a very solid lift for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But like they just had no context. Like when they thought heavy, they thought, oh, a 600-pound deadlift is heavy. They didn't think a 325 deadlift is heavy. So like when they hit that number there at the seminar, and like everyone there was like freaking out, and especially the other women there, they were like, oh, like we didn't realize we were actually strong. And I think that was like an important thing, because like as much as I love the internet, I feel like a lot of like the forums and message boards kind of and like you see these strength standard tables that people have, I feel like that kind of breeds a sense of mediocrity. Like I don't even know what the numbers are. Like maybe like a one-time body weight bench press is like considered an intermediate or whatnot. Like, but let's say you're new to lifting and you have a lot of potential, but like you see one-time body weight, that's intermediate. So like if I hit that, like I'm fairly strong, whatever. Like then you kind of things like that are really what sort of set your expectations. And going back to fatigue being largely perceptual, like if you get in your mind that I am strong and it's hard to get stronger when you're already strong, or like if you get in your mind that like this weight's heavy, like the weight's gonna feel heavy, like it just does. Something that I do to a lot of my friends, because I live in America and we use pounds because because we're stupid. Anyway,
Canadians, we masquerade like we don't, but everyone here uses pounds and inches.
That makes me feel better. Anyway, so a lot of my friends, like weightlifters, use kilos, but a lot of my friends who are powerlifters, they only know how to use pounds. And so when they would come and lift with me in that gym, it was like primarily a weightlifting gym, and so most of the plates in there are in kilos. And so they would be like working up to a heavy weight, and they'd be like, how do you do like the whole kilos to pounds thing? I was like, oh, a kilo is 2 pounds. And they were like, oh, okay. So like
2.2. Oh.
So no. So here's the thing.
Yeah.
A guy, he had a max of 475, and like all of his numbers in training were like he really thought on a good day he could hit a 500-pound squat. And so he came to the gym and we were lifting, and I was like, yeah, a kilo is 2 pounds. And he was like, okay, sweet. So start working up to a max, and he works up to he either hit, I think he hit 240 and missed 250. So he squatted 539, and he was like, and he almost got 250 keys. Like he almost got 551, and he was like so upset. He's like, man, I only hit 480. Like I've done 475 before, so like like, it's good. I'm happy I hit a PR, but I really thought I was good for 500. I was like, well, actually, you just did 540. And he was like, what? But
Oh my God,
no,
that
it's
is
530,
awesome.
529, whatever. But yeah, like because like he knew all he knew what the weight actually felt like, not what it was supposed to feel like. So like when when you're expecting 500 to be heavy, but you actually think 500 is like 30 pounds under your current max, like, it doesn't feel heavy anymore. And like, okay, so when I talk about stuff like that, people kind of get in their minds that it is just all in your head, and like, it's not all in your head, obviously. Like, there are very much physical limits, but like, there are physical limits and there are mental limits. And what I want to set people up to do is to be limited by your physical limits. Like, maybe you have like you have a certain ceiling for your genetic potential, and I want you to be able to work as hard as you can and hit that ceiling of physical potential instead of having like artificial mental blocks before you get to that point. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
You have like a mental process of something you do when you're going in to hit a PR. Because like if you're going to hit like a 600-pound squat, you can't just walk up to the bar and squat. Maybe you can, but I mean, is there something you have to like get yourself super engaged in? Um,
Um, okay, so different people are different with that. Like, different people need different strategies like to manage arousal. Um, so have you seen like an arousal performance curve?
no, no.
Okay, so
I know that the more aroused I am, the better I perform usually.
okay, so you're the opposite from me. Um, so an arousal curve is basically a bell curve, and in the middle of the curve, at the very top, you have optimal performance. Um, and when you're to the left of the curve, you have low arousal and you don't perform well. When you're to the right of the curve, you have too high of arousal and you don't perform well. Um, so a lot of people, what they'll wind up doing is like the weight will get in their head too much, and like they'll freak themselves out and they'll get way over aroused and not be able to perform well. And then other people, like, it sounds like you, they, if they don't like get kind of psyched, they don't like take the lift seriously enough, and they're under aroused to perform well enough. So someone like me, like, I have to manage my arousal because I tend to get over aroused, and so I have to do something that like brings me down half a notch, so I wind up at the top of that curve. And it sounds like someone like you need something to bring you up half a notch, so you wind up at the top of that curve. But like, people ask me, I have a video where I was squatting 725 plus 180 pounds of chain. So it was like 900 at the top, about 760 at the bottom, and right around 800 through the sticking point. And I had The One That Got Away by Katy Perry playing, and people were like, how do you work out to that shit? And I'm like, well, if I was working out to like Lamb of God or something, like I've tried that before, and I just get like too psyched, and like I just freak myself out and I miss the lift. Like, I need something that like still is kind of upbeat and has like a decent rhythm and whatnot, but that if it's too intense, I become over aroused. And a lot of other people, they do well with the really loud, aggressive music for the opposite reason.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually don't even lift to music, but what I do is, yeah, I kind of do like that stereotypical thing where you just kind of pump yourself up. You're like, let's go, you got this.
Yeah.
Rest, and then you kind of do it. But I can only do that a couple times a workout, and then
Yeah.
it depletes me. So I kind of save it for a couple sets that I really want to PR at.
No, okay, that's another really good point. And I meant to say this when we were talking about Chico and talking about training to maximize total volume. And this also ties in very well with fatigue being just as much perceptual as physical, because like, just physically, there's, if you hit 95% being relatively calm and you hit 100%, getting really psyched up. Just in terms of stress on the muscles themselves, that's 5% more weight, 5% more tension, whatever. Like, it shouldn't really make that big of a difference. But when you use that emotional arousal to get the weight, like, it's going to be, like, that lift is going to be disproportionately more fatiguing. And same thing, like, if you really have to, like, dig deep within yourself to grind out a rep max, like if you're doing, like, 80% for as many as possible, you might get, like, 8 or 9. But you could do 3 sets of 5 really easy, because you're staying a fair amount away from failure. And, like, that's 50% more volume. But you'll be a lot less tired the next day, even though you did quite a bit more work doing the 3 sets of 5 versus the really digging down and giving everything you got to get that 8th or 9th rep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. When I had Anthony, do you know Anthony Michael?
Yeah.
Anthony Michael, or Michael, I call him Michael. But yeah, he was when I had him on, he was talking about like stoic training, where you kind of go in completely composed without doing the arousal stuff, or maybe just save the arousal stuff for later. I kind of like to throw in a bit of arousal every now and again to hit like some PR, but I don't overdo it. No, it's quite interesting. So I guess in your headspace, because I've had clients and stuff that they'll plateau in their strength development because they get so inside their head. They'll, like, literally, I had one client, he probably knows who he is if he's listening, but I had to flesh this out with him because literally I uncovered what was happening, and literally he was day to day was stressing out about hitting his PRs the next day or that workout. And so he was putting all this pressure on himself to get this PR, get this PR, get this PR. And it was almost like he was walking with a ball and chain dragging at him instead of being like, dude, just forget about the workout until you get there. Like, it's okay.
Something that I do in my own training that kind of helps clear up that headspace, because if I'm really focusing on like a very PR driven routine, like I end up feeling kind of the same way. So what I do is I auto regulate my training, and based on how I feel in the gym, that kind of determines what rep range I'm going to be working in. But I set it up opposite from most people. If I go in the gym and I feel really lousy, that's when I try to hit a new 1 rep max. And if I feel great, like, that's usually when I do something that's like a little bit lighter, more like 8 to 10 reps or something like that. And the reason I do it is just think about what you get out of the 2 potential outcomes of trying to hit a new 1 rep max when you feel lousy. So if you work up and you hit like 95%, but you miss your old PR and you fail to hit a new PR, it's like, whatever. Like, I felt like crap today anyways. There's no point in beating yourself up about it, because you know that you're not supposed to hit a PR that day. So if you don't, it's no sweat. If you do, it's freaking fantastic, because you're like, hey, I hit a new PR on the worst possible day, so now, like, that's not a weight that needs to be in my head anymore. Like, if I could hit it today, I can hit it any day. Whereas if you go in the gym and you're feeling fantastic, like it's best training session ever, and you try to hit a new PR, if you don't hit it, then you're like, oh shit, like, my training isn't working, like, I felt great today and I still was unable to do this. And if you do get it, it might still be in your head, because, you're kind of thinking like, well, I hit this weight, but like all of the stars were aligned and there was a chorus of angels singing upon me, and like I timed my pre-workout just right, and like I hit this weight, but if I feel 90% tomorrow, like, will I still be able to do it? So yeah, I usually use my really good days, because volume is the more important factor long term. When I'm feeling really good, I'm like, okay, I feel great today. I can hammer a ton of volume with slightly lighter weight. And when I don't feel good, and when I know my body isn't going to be able to handle a ton of training volume, those are the days that I have my lower volume workouts and shoot for PRs, because then if I do hit a PR, I feel like I'm 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And if I don't hit one, like, it's not something I'm going to dwell on, because I knew I felt bad going into the workout.
Okay. And just to kind of reiterate this, when you speak of doing high volume, that's like grabbing like a 8 rep max and just doing multiple sets of 3 reps. Is that like one example? Or is there something else?
Uh, that would be one example. I get bored doing the same weight for too many sets, so that might be like 3 or 4 sets with 80%, and then maybe hit like 4 or 5 with like 85%, like heavier, a little bit closer to failure, and then maybe like 2 sets of 15 with like 60%, and then just put like 135 on the bar and do it until I feel like I'm going to pass out.
Wow. Okay. And so, like, is there a certain amount of reps you're trying to get on a lift?
Um,
Is it like 30 to 50 or?
roughly, yeah. Like, and this is kind of so okay. In my own training, um, it's almost entirely by feel, and like I record things and look to make sure I have the trend that I'm looking for over time. But I don't really write that in stone like session to session. When I'm planning training for other people, like kind of off season, like building work capacity, that's usually 30 to 50 for someone who's relatively new, and 40 to 60 for someone who's more experienced. Like relatively heavy reps, like somewhere between 65 and 80%. And then for more like peaking purposes, 15 to 25-ish, or like 20 to 30 reps, depending how trained they are, with like 80 to 90% tends to be. But yeah, those are just kind of rough outlines, but I don't stick to them too terribly hard in my own training.
Right. And how many lifts do you usually do to work out on a volume routine?
I usually do full body, so I'll usually start with something upper body, just because if I do lower body first, I don't feel like doing anything afterwards. But I usually hit some sort of bench or overhead pretty hard for like 6 to 12 total work sets, and then move on to some sort of squat or deadlift for similar.
Okay, cool. Actually, this just brings me up a little anecdote I had, because I know a lot of people that start getting into strength training, if they go in the bodybuilding forums, like, oh, what's the first routine to do? They'll do the starting strength. It's very, very tremendously common. And so one thing I see very, very, very often is people will add a ton of weight onto their squat. They might go from squatting 135, and then in a matter of 3 months, they're squatting well over 2 plates. But their bench has gone up like 15 pounds, and I've always had like the kind of thought that, like, if you're killing yourself on some heavy squats, your neural system may be wiped when you go in to set a bench press PR. Like, it's hard to really like be strong after squatting or deadlifting really heavy.
No, I agree with that, and another thing that I think explains that partially as well is the gap between what you can currently do and what you're capable of for each lift. So like most people like on a routine like starting strength, they put a ton on their squat, a little bit on their deadlift, and not very much on their bench. But it's like, what have you been doing in life so far that mimics a heavy back squat? Like, I mean, maybe squatting down to pick something up off the ground, but that's not squatting down to pick something up off the ground with like 300 pounds on your back. But most people have at least, most people have at least like somewhat strong legs though. But it's like, even they have like potential strength in their legs, but since they haven't done anything to train that squatting movement, the more often they train it, like when they're training it 3 times a week, that catches their actual strength up with their potential strength fairly quickly. And especially with squat, there's usually a pretty big gap there. Like, your first day in the gym, you can't squat as much as you're capable of squatting just because it's not an efficient motor pattern yet. There's not as big of a difference for deadlift usually, because even if you haven't been doing barbell deadlifts, like you've had to pick heavy stuff up off the ground at some point in your life before you start lifting. So a lot of people come to the gym, and even if it's the first time they've done a barbell deadlift, they still can pull relatively decent weight. But then when they have that same type of training program, their deadlift doesn't improve as much as their squat does, because there's not as big of a gap between how strong they could be and how strong they actually are. And bench on the other side of the continuum, like most people have at least like done some push-ups or something, which unless you're benching like 2 times body weight, like the motor pattern is basically the same, and like unless you're really, really strong, I mean, a body weight bench press is like a moderately heavy movement for someone who's untrained. So you can take that, and that maps pretty strongly directly to barbell bench press. So unless you start actually like building a lot of mass in your upper body, you're not going to put that much on your bench just by improving neurological efficiency, whereas you will for squat.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, yeah. And squat is such a foreign movement to someone like where they could have the squat strength to squat like, you know, their body weight or more, but like they're stuck at like 135 because it's just new. It's weird. Having the bar on their back, it's like in the form. It makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to kind of get like a glimpse, a first-hand look into like your style of workout on more of a volume routine. You mentioned that you start with some upper body work. You do like some bench presses, and then or military presses, and then you go into squat. Would you be doing squats and deadlifts on the same day?
Not typically. I usually set it up theoretically 4 days a week. Right now I'm pretty busy, so it turns out to be 3 days a week. But first thing I do is something that I suck at, like something to build up like a very glaring weakness. And for me, that's hamstrings and lats. That's another fun little anecdote. People like to talk about how important like upper back work is to shoulder health and to benching a lot. I have not done any dedicated upper back work since I was like 16 years old. Like no rows, very few pull-ups. Actually, no, there was a period I did a lot of pull-ups, but that was like a 3-month period. But basically, like 6 years that I did very minimal upper back work. My shoulders are fine, and I can lift a lot of weight. So it's one of those things that it might be a better safe than sorry thing, but you can get strong without doing a ton of upper back work, like a lot of people say. Anyway, but now it's finally gotten to the point that my upper back is just pathetically weak, and it's very much limiting my ability, especially to deadlift. So the first thing I do when I get to the gym is I do a ton of rows. Like I'll do 2 or 3 sets of 20 to get the blood flowing, and then I'll work up to like a few heavier sets of 5 to 8. And that's first thing in the gym every day, just to bring up that weakness. And not everyone has something as glaringly weak on them as rows are for me. Like I'm a 700-pound deadlifter, and I can do strict rows with like 185. I kid you not. Like it's absolutely miserable. But yeah, so that's number one. After that is pressing, again, because pressing doesn't tend to take away from squatting or deadlifting as much as squatting or deadlifting takes away from subsequent work of any sort. So yeah, it'll be, depending how I feel for the day, usually like 6 to 10 work sets there. And then I'll do some sort of squat or deadlift. And basically just give that whatever I have left. And again, it depends on the day. If I'm not feeling it that day, it'll be lower volume, and if I am feeling it that day, I resist the urge to go heavy, and use the opportunity to do a lot more volume.
Cool. So it's about like 3 main lifts and like 8 sets per movement, like 24 sets total a workout, roughly. I guess it still changes, but just on the mark.
Well, that's like for heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And then something I've really been liking lately are like occlusion work. Like taking a knee wrap or a band and putting it around your upper arm or upper leg for like body weight squats or curls or tricep extensions.
Does it trap more blood in the muscle?
Yeah. Have you read some of that research? Most of it is by Jacob Wilson and Jeremy Linicki. I think that's how you say it.
I'm familiar about the hypertrophy effects of that type of work.
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. And the thing about it that really appeals to me is that it causes pretty substantial hypertrophy, and it does it with very low loads. And they've done studies where they looked at like markers of muscle damage, like oh, I'm blanking on some of them now, but like creatine kinase and a few others, like things that tend to correlate strongly with how much muscle damage is going on. And occlusion work doesn't increase markers of muscle damage, but still causes hypertrophy. So it's one of those things that you can hit like occlusion work pretty strong or pretty hard, pretty frequently, and since it's not really causing any significant muscle damage, like it makes you bigger without actually like detracting from how often you can train heavy.
Interesting. So I heard about it, but I kind of just wrote it off as like crazy. I'm
Yeah.
like it was weird. So do you need to get specific bands to do that? Are there? What do you use?
Um, I usually just use the gym I train at has just like a set of regular jump stretch bands, and I use either the minis or the monster minis for my arms, and I use knee wraps for my legs.
And you tie them, or you because actually, the one lagging point I'll say that I've been working on bringing up are my biceps. Everything else tends to grow nicely when I'm focusing on hypertrophy, but the biceps are a much slower road. And I've kind of felt like, generally speaking, like it's like those 40-year-old bodybuilders that have great biceps, the ones that have been training for 2 decades,
Uh-huh.
as far as natural lifters. So I mean, I could implement occlusion training with my bicep training like twice a week to kind of to create some hypertrophy. And it's affirming that you've actually like been able to notice a great difference with it.
Yeah, it's so how you do it is kind of the theory behind it is you're trying to occlude your veins without occluding your arteries. So your veins have a very, very low blood pressure. At rest, it's like 4 to 10 millimeters of mercury. And I don't think it ever gets above like 20 or 30. The numbers aren't that important. Either way, veins, very low blood pressure. Arteries, like 120 over 80 at rest, can go well over 200 over like 120 during resistance exercise. So arteries have a much higher blood pressure. So when you wrap the band around your arm or like around your leg, you're trying to put enough pressure on it that blood can't get out from your veins, but that it still can get in via your arteries. So you just wind up with a lot of blood in the limb. And so one, you get more metabolite accumulation because you can't clear those metabolites out of the muscle from your vein. And also cellular swelling, that's another proposed mechanism for hypertrophy. And just simply because you're getting a ton of blood in and you can't get any out, that increases that osmotic pressure and you get more cell swelling. So yeah, basically, I think in the research they've done on how to know you're occluding veins but not arteries is I think for upper body they say like if you rate pressure on a scale from 0 to 10, the pressure should be somewhere around 7 to 8. And for lower body, it should be like closer to 9 or so, because like your big femoral vein runs like right along the inside of your leg, and so you have to cinch the wrap down pretty tight because you also have those adductor muscles there, and you have to push them down a little bit so you can occlude that vein. So it should feel pretty frickin' tight on your leg, and not quite as frickin' tight on your arm, but basically you'll know you did it right when 5 seconds later all of the veins in your arm look like the Nile Delta. Like before you even start lifting the weight, you start developing the pump of your life. Like that's basically how you know you did it right.
Damn. So I guess you could only really do it on like your arms. Can you like would it work on your calves? Because that's a point that like a lot of people want to build, but like it's so stubborn. I guess it's hard to
I
trap blood in there.
I don't know. I don't think there's been any research on your calves, but it wouldn't surprise me if it would. Another neat thing about it is people assume that it only works for things that are like distal to where the band is. So like if you put it on your upper arm, it would like only work for your biceps and triceps. But they actually did one with, I believe it was bench press, and they ended up getting like higher EMG readings for the pecs as well, because like since you get the higher metabolite accumulation in your triceps, your pecs end up having to do more work to continue the set as your triceps fatigue. So it would theoretically work for different reasons, but it would also, if you do occlusion stuff for your arms for like a compound lift like bench, it would still work your pecs harder as well with a lighter weight.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. I actually kind of want to give this a rundown for a couple months. Sounds like sort of some like new training that's starting to probably slowly trickle down. I mean, maybe in a couple of years, everyone will be like wrapping their bodies with like bands and lifting weights. Who knows?
And so just as far as like implementation of it goes, in the research they usually take a pretty lightweight, like between 20 and 40% of your 1 rep max, and you try to do 3 to 4 sets of like 20 to 30, 40-ish reps, with like a relatively short rest in between. And you don't want to leave the band on for more than like 5 minutes at a time, because, well, you just want to get that blood out of the muscle before it's been in there for like hours. Like that's not a particularly good thing. But a lot of I've heard people talk about the risks of it, but as far as I'm concerned, like you only run any real risks if you're unless one, you're putting it on way too tight, or two, unless you leave it on for like 30 minutes at a time, which I feel like good common sense would tell you not to do that. But what you can't always bet on people having good common sense.
Right. Very cool. No, it's interesting. So, are there a lot of people in the strength and hypertrophy field that are starting to utilize this? Because I still haven't really heard many people talk about it.
I think more like research-oriented people know about it than actual like athletes and coaches do. But I think it's starting to get more and more into the common consciousness. One of the things I'm really excited about is the master's program I'm starting in the spring. One of the professors in it is Jacob Wilson, and he's done quite a bit of that research. So I'm excited to talk to him about it, like a little bit more in the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, hey, we've fleshed out a lot of topics. This has been one of the longest podcasts I've done in some time, a year or more. Greg, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a blast running through topics with you. Yeah. So people that want to check you out, they can go to gregnuckols.com.
Yep.
And that's Nuckols.
That's it.
Okay, cool. And we'll have all your information in the show notes if people are at Kinobody.com. So that will be there. And yeah, take care, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Sounds great. Thanks, Greg.